Hello, everyone. I'm Vadim Lieberman, editor of ERE, and you all came on a great day. That's because I'm here with an amazing roster of guests today who are eager to share their insights with you and keep it real when it comes to the subject and title of today's webinar, Measuring the Impact of Diversity Hiring. So I hope you're all ready for a candid, dynamic dialogue that will not tiptoe around today's challenges around diversity hiring. So first, to get started, let me introduce all the faces you see in front of you right now. So first up, we've got Gary Olive, a senior consultant at 360 HR Consults, and a recruiter with a particular expertise in recruiting for diversity. So first, Gary, welcome today.
Hey, Vadim, great to be here with everyone.
Yep, good to have you here. Okay, we've also got Kimberly Jones with us today. Kim is UC Irvine's Senior Director of Enterprise Talent Strategy, as well as an instructor at the university's Department of Continuing Ed. Kim, hello, so happy to have you here.
Good, I'll say West Coast, good morning, but for those of you on the East Coast, good afternoon.
Yeah, we were joking backstage, or maybe I wasn't joking. I think there's only one coast that matters. Clearly, I'm on the East Coast, but we can, you know what? We're all for diversity, right? Diversity of coast too. There you go. Yeah. We've got Joelle Torres with us as well, who is the TA manager for the Americas at Twilio. So welcome, Joelle.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. It's really happy to be here.
Yep, happy to have you as well. So, like I said, we're going to get into a robust conversation in a moment. But first, of course, I want to point out that today's webinar is sponsored by GEM. And so the other face you see on your screen, obviously, is Zoe Wren from GEM. So, Zoe, first, welcome. Thanks for being here and sponsoring.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe, and I'm so excited to be here today and to hear the awesome panelists here we have today to discuss the best practices of measuring the impact of diversity hiring. GEM is so proud to be sponsoring this webinar, as diversity has been a core value of GEM and GEM's products since day one. We have a quick intro video to GEM to show you, and then we can dive right into the discussion. If the video piques your interest and you would like to learn more about GEM, please reach out to us at sales@gem.com. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Zoe. So everyone, Zoe, Gary, Kim, and Joelle, we're all going to go off camera, off of audio, and I'm going to play that video, and we will be right back with the conversation. See you in just a minute, everyone.
Many organizations find it difficult to attract qualified talent that will drive the next wave of innovation at their company. And we're seeing this challenge across the industry, from large enterprise customers like Cisco and McDonald's to agile tech companies with amazing brands like Slack, Peloton, and DoorDash. That's why GEM was created, with the fundamental belief that the traditional ways of recruiting, like managing candidates from inbound sources like career pages, posting on job sites, etc., are no longer sufficient to attract the levels of top talent required to compete in today's digital economy, especially as it becomes harder and harder to find the right talent for key roles. So think data scientists, software engineers, or really any hard-to-fill role, because more and more companies are competing for candidates across the same limited talent pools. The challenge of maintaining a healthy pipeline is compounded by the need to attract for diverse talent. For organizations that value diversity, this makes the pipeline problem even harder, because our inbound applicants don't always represent the most diverse talent pools, and we have no control over who applies. These challenges have driven companies to look at better ways to engage with talent where it is in the market. And that's why companies from Cisco to Twilio are taking a more proactive approach to engaging with passive talent, rather than waiting for the right people to apply. That's why GEM was started. GEM's founders were engineering managers at high growth companies. As hiring managers, they quickly realized that the traditional tech stack for recruiting wasn't built to support the passive nurture of talent. Because ATSs were designed to track inbound applicants, this leaves most recruiting organizations stuck with managing relationships and passive talent outreach in manual, time-consuming, and error-prone processes like spreadsheets, one-off in-mails, and emails. This means a poor candidate experience, and so many miss opportunities in engaging with top talent when the timing is right. GEM was created to fill that void that exists in the market, a purpose-built platform to manage passive talent engagement and give recruiting teams that workflow, the automation, and analytics they need to be more efficient and consistently build great and diverse teams. And one of the great things about GEM is because all of these passive talent relationships are now tracked in one central place, you'll get much more visibility and predictability into your own hiring funnels, allowing your team to make more data-driven approach to recruiting and hiring.
Okay, we are back. Let's get all of our panelists back here too. And as Kim and Joelle make it back in, just want to, again, thank you, Zoe, and thank you, GEM, for sponsoring today's webinar. I should also point out that GEM has made available some handouts, which hopefully should be downloadable in your files tab. So please have a look at those as well. And again, before we get started, just want to let everyone know as well that a recording of this webinar will be sent out by end of day tomorrow. It'll include SHRM and HRCI codes. And also, we want to make this webinar really interactive. So maybe you agree with something one of our panelists said. Post that in the chat. Maybe you think one of them said something completely, totally wacko crazy. My fingers are crossed. Post that in the chat too. But most importantly, they're all here really to help you with your challenges and provide insights. So if you have questions, please, by all means, post that in the chat, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible as we have today's discussion. So, with that said, I hope everyone's ready. Let's just really get into it, everybody. So, I guess just to kick off the conversation, right? I want to start by asking, do you think that the problem when it comes to diversity metrics, right, is that companies don't know what to measure or don't know how to measure it, right? Or maybe they don't know how to tell a story around it. Like, what do you think is the main problem when it comes to diversity metrics? Joelle, why don't we start with you?
Oh, yeah. Start the rough stuff or the hard stuff with me. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I think it really depends on the maturity of the company and where they stood in the past. I mean, there's some companies that were didn't have an eye for diversity in the past, and not to say that they didn't care, it just wasn't something that they were measuring. And so all historically what they had been measuring were all focused on executing, making the hire, right? But then now they're having to go back and re-architect their data to figure out like, hey, can we measure at different parts of the interview process? And I think maybe it's a know-how sometimes of figuring out like how to do it and then how to legally do it and making sure that they're staying compliant within everything as well. And so I think for me, when you ask me that question, that's the first thing that really comes to mind is the daunting task of figuring out how, if they were at zero before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a good point. Kim, I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are. Like, is it figuring out how to measure something, what to measure? Like, what do you think the main struggle is when it comes to diversity hiring metrics?
Yeah, so I think it's the what first and then the how, because you have to define what you want to measure. And I will say in general, when you think about talent acquisition over the past 20 years, because applicant tracking systems have changed so dramatically, you have to know what's important to measure. And so one of the things I try to be really focused on to help people about metrics in general, not just specifically diversity, but TA. And so if you're already struggling with what TA metrics to measure, you'll also struggle when you get to the diversity aspect of it. And the way that I try to help center, clients and my peers is, what are we trying to measure? And so there's two questions that I always ask. Are we measuring strategy effectiveness or process efficiency? And diversity tends to be in this category of strategy effectiveness. And so if you have a diversity strategy that ultimately would say, we want to improve representation of women, ethnic minorities, and veterans, that's your strategy, then you have to know where you want to measure, what those measurements will look like, and do you have the capability to grab the data out of your applicant tracking system. It's not to say I specifically need a diversity configuration. It's of the things that I'm already measuring in the system. Do I have greater insight or clarity into that metrics or data set that also then gives me the diversity numbers that I'm looking for? So I think it's the what first that has to be aligned with your diversity strategy, and the how. Do I already have an existing or set of metrics in the system, and can I dig a little bit deeper to be able to expose whether or not I'm seeing a positive trend in the aspects of the recruiting process that tell me about my diversity?
Before we get to Gary, just 1 second, because I just want to I don't know if I'd call it pushing back, Kim, but I do want to just I want to get more of an answer from you on this. I want to know, of course, I think it goes without saying that the what should come before the how. I think we can all agree on that. But I think where I was getting at with my question is, what is it that companies struggle more with? Is it defining that what to begin with, or is it then creating those processes, how you're going to measure it?
I think it's the what, because it can sometimes feel very intangible. We want to feel better about diversity. We want to feel better about equity. We want to feel better about inclusion. Then what am I actually measuring that tells me a story about how I'm performing relative to being better, or at least documenting what we're doing for diversity? So I believe that probably the former is that understanding what to measure might be the challenge that most organizations may still be struggling with around this conversation for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah. And I know, Gary, you're eager to jump in. But by the way, again, I just want to point out, if anyone has comments in the chat, questions in the chat, please post those. And I would love to hear, I think we all might be interested in seeing, and your colleagues as well, at your own organizations, is it defining, what you want to measure or how to measure it when it comes to diversity hiring metrics? I'd love to see just some comments in the chat about your own experiences and attendee at your company. But Gary, I know that you were eager to jump in. Please share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, as Joelle was saying, if a company is just starting from zero, of course they're going to be struggling with diversity and a kind of a policy and guidelines around that type of hiring. But the issue also is, like, diversity has changed throughout the years. I mean, it's always fluid, it's evolving. And then on top of that, now we throw in our pandemic, COVID, and I think it's really thrown a lot of things into flux. So I think that's adding to the confusion. So maybe the what and the how is all getting mixed up. It's like a gumbo, like, whoa, where do we go now? Because now we're not even in the office. Are we coming back? Oh, no, we're not coming back. So I think those are further complicating matters.
Yeah. Gary, let me stick with you for a moment and just ask you, right, you just mentioned how times are evolving, times are changing, right? So just putting aside how we measure the diversity, certain metrics, and we'll get to that in a moment, but which diversity metrics are most important right now? And has that changed, evolved over time?
Well, I think the main thing it comes down to is source of hire. It's an old metric, but it means different things now. And I think that's always one to pay attention to. Source of hire was typically, are we going to use Career Builder or Indeed or something like that? But now we're finding, of course, the candidates market. So you have to be even more proactive and visionary, in the search. So that is one big thing. I think, and the other issue is with source of hire, then you're looking at something in hire to interview ratio or interview to hire ratio. Because in the old days, it just kind of meant, okay, is this manager hiring people that interviews? But now it's a way to actually have a deeper dive into the hiring manager's practices. So I think that we'll get into that more later. But those are a couple of ratios that I like to look at.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. How about you, Joelle? What do you think? Like, which metrics, diversity hiring metrics specifically, of course, do you feel are most important today, and are they different than they had been in the past?
Just realized my mic was off. I think it really depends. I mean, I will tell you this. One of the things that especially at a larger organization who's wanting to implement this sort of thing, I'm telling my team to make sure that you're doing research on what the market provides, right? And whatever that whatever the market provides, make sure you're beating that market on a consistent basis from an outreach standpoint to make sure that the effort is there at the very top of the process. And now that's passive candidates, right? Once people enter the interview process, that's a different scenario. I think that's where we have to kind of make sure that we're following compliance and those sort of things. But from a passive candidate perspective, and also even just bringing people in from who had previously applied and those sort of things. Again, I think for me, and by the way, I'm a talent acquisition manager from a sourcing team, so I have a little bit of a bias towards the top of the funnel. And so, for me, that's where I'm telling my team to go to. Let's do the research. Let's find as much material as we can so we can perform against it and beat it on a consistent basis every single week. And for us, we've been fortunate to find some success in that as well. Now, there's continuous tweaking and stuff throughout some of the rest of the interview process. But I think that's where we definitely start.
Yeah. How about you, Kim? I know in previous conversations we've talked about let's look at your hiring process, right? And let's so talk to me a little bit. Tell the masses a little bit about that, right? Like, how exactly should they be looking at their hiring process to decide, again, which metrics, because there are so many metrics that you can just dump, right? And then you're just dumping stats and numbers, and they lack meaning as a result. So maybe you can shed some light on maybe what you do or what you would recommend in terms of knowing or figuring out, identifying which diversity metrics should matter most to an organization.
Yeah, so a couple things, and there's a great question in the chat window, and I'm not sure if I can only see it or if you, but I think it would be worth interjecting here wherever it's the appropriate time. But there's a question about benchmarking around inclusion. So let me answer your question, and I'll leave it to you to really guide us on how we might be able to incorporate that question in some discussion. But so when you think the TA process doesn't get you from point A to point B in one single stop. There are multiple phases of the process, all of which are an opportunity you have an opportunity to measure. And so I'm going to agree with Joel that the top of the funnel, you'll never reach your goal for diversity hires if the candidates aren't in your candidate pool. And so the top of the funnel has to be well populated if you ever want to get people, just statistically, numerically get people to hire. And so and not just because I align with Joel as kind of the sourcing function, you want candidates in the top of your funnel, in your candidate pool, either active or passive candidates. But you can't get them there if you don't have the strategy and haven't created relationships and brand presence with a wide population of diverse candidates. And so I think it's two numbers. It's, yes, the top of your funnel, your candidate pool, but I think it's also important to measure or document the quantity and quality of those relationships and that visibility with a really broad group of professional organizations, job boards, networking groups on all social media platforms, including TikTok. I want to talk about that too. But if you don't start broad enough with enough fish in your net, you will never get to the actual diversity hire. So those would be the two metrics that I would focus on: the number of quality relationships and visibility that you have, and then the number of diverse candidates at the top of your funnel in your candidate pool.
Yeah, and Kim's right to draw attention to some of the questions, which I'm happy are coming into the chat. I'm gonna ask that first one that came in from Michael Purdue. Thanks, Michael, for asking. But might it be that most companies still struggle with feeling comfortable about defining what they wish to devise? With which metrics, basically struggling to devise the metrics to measure, I think is what Michael is asking. Gary, what do you think? Are companies struggling to just even define those metrics to begin with? This goes back to the earlier question, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to say no. I think they know. I think by now we all know, I think, as long as I've been an adult, we've been talking about diversity and DEI. I've seen the letters added, DEI, DE, DEI, DEI, and B. So I think companies know what to do. It's the want to that I think is missing, and it has to be an organizational shift. Leadership, of course, we know is important, but it's also got to be buy-in from the entire leadership team, managers and line supervisors as well have to buy in, and tie that to kind of the business needs as well. So I think that is a better way, I think, to emphasize rather than the want to. I think they know, diverse candidates, a black guy, an Asian lady, a Native American. Okay, we're good. I think it's an organizational commitment that I think is trumps all that.
Yeah. Ana Campos is commenting that we struggle with the how, to measure. Usually we cannot have targets due to the fact that our hiring process looks for the best fit no matter who that is. So having a target for number of a certain group is not possible. Joel, what would you say to Ana?
No, I agree. You should hire the best person. In fact, my current company, one of our values is to not settle, but a byline of it is to hire the best. And so the way we've gone about it is, just to my earlier point, we focus on the top of the funnel. We're making sure, because if you focus only on applicants and referrals, well, for one, those are two separate things. When you look at applicants, theoretically, the market's gonna show up in your applicant pool. So let's just say you're working on engineers, and 13% of what you find is 13% of the people in your applicant pool might identify as female. Now, what you have to do is to make sure that the effort, like if you just only focus on those two channels of candidates, you're not ever going to make any sort of impact to your diversity, if you have any goals, right, or to diversity numbers in general. So for us, what we've done is we focus on the top of the funnel, make sure that the effort's there. For example, I had a candidate, we'll go and we'll generate lists and scrape and research and do all these different things to make sure that we're pushing people into the pipeline so that it's not staying at 13% when they enter the interview process. Maybe it gets bumped up to 30%, maybe it's 40%. But once they enter the interview process, cards are going to have to lay where they land, right? And we want to make sure that we are hiring the best, but we also, at the same time, just because you're reaching out to these people doesn't necessarily mean that they're not quality either, right? My team is also focused on the quality of the people they're reaching out to, not just, just volume and pushing people in, those sort of things. They're reaching out to the right people as well.
No, I mean, it's a great point. I know Gary's, actually you all really touched upon this already, but in terms of which metrics are most important, et cetera. I know that one of the things, Gary, I just want to go back to you for a moment, that we talked about, prior to today, is a disconnect that you feel between goals, objectives, and action at some companies. Can you just elaborate on that? What is the nature of that disconnect? Where does it happen? Why does it happen?
For instance, after, the George Floyd and the social unrest in 2020, we saw many companies I worked at, a couple of them, were these beautiful webinars and presentations on, let's have a listening party, a listening tour, let us hear you, then, presentation on Juneteenth and those kinds of things. But now that is what we're seeing, that is not enough. So the disconnect is, I think, between that action part of, companies want to do the right thing, or at least they're saying that, but the disconnect is with that action. Okay, what does our leadership team look like, and what is our goal in wanting to get there? How are we going to get there? So that action part is still lacking in many organizations that I see. CEOs and leadership teams can look at their own LinkedIn connections and see what does it look like, their own connection pool, their own slate. So I still, get back to Anna's question real quick. Source of hire, it comes, that's still a huge one, is source of hire. Where are you looking? So that is always going to be something I think you can fall back on as far as looking at your diversity metric.
Yeah. I mean, again, it seems to me that it's most, listen, I'm not a recruiter. I just play at recruiting. I'm recruiting adjacent, shall we say, but I'm not, a practitioner. I certainly don't have the experience that the three of you have. But it seems to me that, like we just discussed before, it's really important to look at your whole hiring process, right? From top of funnel to, I know, Gary, we talked about this even before today, not even just time of hire, right? But like retention afterwards. Like, let's keep going and let's look at that to really identify which areas are influencing, where are you weakest in, where are you strongest in, and what's influencing that. And I know, Kim, we've talked, you and I have talked about this issue too. And so I want to just ask you, Kim, one of the things that we're also trying to identify or talk about in this webinar is not just which metrics matter most, but which metrics matter least. And let me just even go further and talk about vanity metrics, right? Because it's very easy to throw out, metrics that aren't meaningless, but that look good. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are vanity metrics that companies might be putting out that maybe they don't even intentionally mean them as vanity metrics, but they aren't really important when it comes to diversity hiring?
Yeah, so a couple things. I like data to really tell a story and not disguise a nightmare. Let me put it that way. So lots of companies put out metrics about their workforce, but not necessarily about what they're doing in their recruitment process. And not because companies aren't capturing it, it's just because they aren't in the business of telling their whole story. And the stories are often told in percentages, which I understand being able to aggregate data, but it is sometimes disingenuous. As I'm still going to get your question about an actual vanity metric, but I want to bring clarity to it. So, for example, Vadim, if you and I were talking, I could say 50% of the people in this conversation are in California. There's only 2 of us in this conversation.
Right.
And so there are times when organizations will offer up a story about the metric that doesn't necessarily really give you clarity into how impactful that particular thing that's being measured is. So when you look at all of the pieces of the process, and so where Joel talked about sourcing, we had an increase of 200% in the number of female applicants. Well, if you were only at 200% makes it seem as though you did something gargantuan. And so I think it's more about misleading through metrics than it is the actual metric, where people are trying to glamorize to tell a story without really telling the entire story. And so that's the area that I feel I'm the most concerned about, is the metric not being told in the most transparent or honest way.
Yeah. No, great point. Joelle, anything to add just about the notion of vanity metrics and how sometimes, again, maybe not even intentionally can twist the reality, let's say?
Yeah. I'll say that I think that exists also in all of recruiting, and maybe even like running a company too, right? Like, I remember at one point I was tempted of saying like, I was this percentage quota, blah, 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 but my quota was like my first quarter, and like the quota was like only 1 hire, and I made 2, kind of a thing. And so, but to her point, like it's absolutely true. Like, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if I don't want to say it's a false narrative, because technically it's true, but it does give the wrong story of what's actually happening in the company. And also, like, I like to see other metrics, like how happy people are, how are they succeeding? How many people, like, okay, great, you got into the company, you're this percentage, but are they succeeding? Are they being given the same opportunities? And those sort of things. And I think those things are a little bit more impactful in terms of, like, I think someone was asking specifically, like, hey, how do we get people to apply? I don't know the actual words that they use over here, but I think all of that plays into that when people are doing research on companies. And if diversity is really high on the priority list, they're going to be looking at that kind of stuff outside of just the percentages that are on there. I mean, I'll say right now, Twilio has had a little bit of a shift on our perception too. Like the one thing that, and I'll just go ahead and say it, like historically we had said that we want X percentage to be this by this year and X percentage to be this by this year. But we kind of had an inward thinking, kind of thinking like, well, you know what? Just because you force someone to hire X percentage doesn't necessarily change the fundamental aspect of like how that our company. We want to be an anti-racist company. We don't want to just like hit a number kind of a thing. And I think that's where we've shifted as a company, kind of going forward.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Gary, what were you going to say?
Time to hire. That's useless.
Well, go ahead, Gary. Go ahead, bash on time to hire. Let's hear it.
Well, especially for our discussion, managers like Joel, I'm just kidding. No, Joel seems like a very visionary, kind of manager I would love to work with. But typically, recruiters will hear, what's the time to hire? What's the time to hire in this role? So if you have for instance, a role that say the time to hire is 20 days, which is very short, but it's being filled by the same type of individual, all white males or all Asian females or white females, then the time to hire could be, an issue there. So generally companies look at the low time to hire is good. If you have low time to hire, you are great. Our recruiting is great. Recruiters are great. There's nothing at all wrong with our hiring practices. So that aspect, I would say time to hire can be useless.
Okay. Let me just mention this, though. In today's climate, I'm playing mainly devil's advocate. That's what I do. In today's hiring climate, with panic really about talent shortages, tight labor pools, it being a candidate-driven market, let's just say that you can see or envision certain companies, particularly in high-volume hiring, really focus on time to hire, right? Let's get those people in. We need them now. We need a lot of people. We need them now. And I'm wondering what the intersection of that line of thinking and those efforts is. What is the intersection between that and diversity itself, and making sure that you're still achieving diversity hiring goals and measuring diversity? Do you think that there's a risk that diversity takes a backseat to just like getting enough people? Or am I just overthinking it? Gary, let me stick with you for a moment.
I don't think there's a risk. I think there's an opportunity. And that, again, comes back to source of hire. Where are you looking for your candidates at? Where are you kind of posting your ads? You're just in reaching one particular demographic? Are you reaching the entire spectrum of diversity, meaning, persons with disabilities or elder, over 50 type individuals, all those types of things? How wide is your spectrum? Are you reaching out to military? So I think that's the opportunity. And I think if you look at all those things, it will increase your candidate pool. That's what the research has showed,
Yeah. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah. So I would say spending a lot of time in the aerospace and defense industry, every day that a position went unfilled, an engineer wasn't doing work, which meant we weren't building a customer, either for hours or for a product. So time to fill was critical. And because of that, we understood the importance and the connectedness with both timeliness and quality of candidate. And there was never a time that we sacrificed either of those. But we didn't get there by accident. We got there very deliberately. So Gary, to your point, if it only takes me 20 days to find the candidates we've always found, but I'm not anywhere close to diversity, am I really a better organization? Where I don't want to suggest that it takes longer to create a diverse candidate pool. What it takes is commitment for an actual strategy and not a hope and pray as recs come open, rec by rec, because that's what happens. Organizations wait until the rec gets open to figure out how to create or interject diversity. You can't wait till you have a rec open. Your talent acquisition team has to have a strategy and resources to draw upon that are constantly running. So then when they get to a rec, they already have a solution identified and they're not in the middle of the clock is ticking in my rec, and for me to deliver this diverse slate, it's going to take me a few days. And now we're 42 days into it. And it's very easy for managers then to say, I want to support this diversity stuff, but you guys are taking too long. The onus really is on your leadership team, your HR organization, your talent acquisition organization to create a strategy where those candidates are easily accessible and plentiful to you, the same way that those kind of normal candidates, the typical candidates, have fallen into your lap when you first post requisitions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I want to get to a question now as well. This is from Gretel. And actually, Joelle, I want to direct this at you because I know a moment ago you were talking about, you mentioned even like measuring happiness or satisfaction, which, by the way, is itself a whole can of worms, like probably a whole other webinar, right? But it does speak to, and I know we touched very just like kind of in passing on the notion of retention. As part of diversity hiring metrics, like to see that full picture. But so Gretel's asking, she's from Costa Rica. By the way, she loves, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if this is male or female actually, but Gretel loves ERE webinars. Diversity in Latin America is quite different though, since most of our majorities are US's minorities, right? But we all, something to point out that, by the way, diversity, and actually I want to get to that, the implication of that in a moment as well. But what Gretel's saying is we all struggle to move from accepting differences to embracing them. And I'm wondering, is there any place in diversity hiring metrics that accounts for that notion, that aspect of diversity, right? That spectrum where it goes more to embracing and celebrating differences, which is more cultural.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I know what she's kind of referring to. You know, we're a global company as well, and there's been some. I've been part of other companies as well as this company where they might acquire a company in a different country where their diversity means something different. Maybe it's only strictly female. Maybe it didn't exist, or maybe it brings in a variety of different things. And I think part of what she's also, what they're saying is, on some aspect they're getting hiring managers to tolerate versus actually accepting. Is that what she's actually trying to say? And so I think from a recruiting standpoint, unfortunately, that's not something I've seen be measured, but that's where our connections and our conversations with our HRBPs come into play, making sure that people are set up on the back end and whatnot. I know from our perspective that we're making sure that there are different programs that are being set up just to make sure that people are trained up, that they are aware of not only just the rule, but the why behind everything. And so to answer I know I'm dancing around your question on like a certain intersection and those sort of things, but I think that's kind of where we stand, is making sure that when we do, bring in countries and bring in people from outside of, how we see things here in the United States, it's important to kind of bring them into the discussion for sure.
Yeah, I want to get also to another question. Kim, I'll lobby this to you because I know that you've been kind of clarifying it behind the scenes, but Urmila, again, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. Lord knows my name's been mispronounced many times, is asking, is it advisable to have diversity targets for the leadership team?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. So diversity targets in general, or that the leadership team would establish diversity targets?
I'm guessing, maybe you can answer both really, but I think that I would think you'd want diversity among your leadership, first of all, right? Just as you would for your employee base, yeah. Right? So
I'm just going to assume this diversity targets in your recruiting process. So I scrolled through here too. So absolutely. And let me tell you why. The same way that we have quality goals and sales goals and revenue goals, there is nothing wrong with having a goal that you're striving towards specific to diversity. But you can't establish a goal if you don't also apply resources and effort and consistency and commitment. And far too often, companies establish a goal and they never resource the team or work to affect culture or change management in an effort to reach that goal. And so here's what it looks like. we put up this goal and say we want to be 42% better for women or veterans or whatever it is, and people sit around and cross their fingers and have these fake meetings about what we're doing, but never really apply effort or commitment to get it done. And then when it doesn't get done, like, oh, well, we tried it and it didn't work, because you never really tried. You have to put the same level of process and structure in reaching diversity goals the same way you do for every other goal. So if I have ambassador teams that are helping to create and nurture relationships with diverse organizations, they need a budget. They also shouldn't be expected to do their regular job and then do this off the side of their desk in their regular eight-hour day. You have to find a way to make sure that people are really committed. And so rather than say, let's see if this happens, no, let's make this happen. Let's be as committed to this as we are to every other thing that is really meaningful to the organization. So establishing a goal. And here's the other thing, if you don't have a lot of external benchmarking, at least measure where you are and identify where you are. Where you are might be 0, it might be 2, it might be 102. Be reasonable about what you're trying to get to, not because it's a quota. So I want to make sure I'm clear about that, because it is something that really is attainable based on available talent pool. The fact that COVID, I hate that it was a global pandemic that created this, but lots of companies have been very reluctant to fund their relocation budgets to get people to areas of the country. Companies are a lot more willing to allow people to work remote. That in and of itself has opened the candidate pool. And so this notion of an available candidate pool as you're working to establish goals is doable. So yes, you should establish goals, and those goals should be supported by resources and process, structure, and commitment. And then Vadim, there's a question about blind resumes. I think is the
yes. I wanted to, this is exactly, Kim. This is exactly. I want to get all of your perspectives on this. But can I interject something about this, because I would like to. I love this topic. So the question, by the way, just for everyone, is from Javier. And the question is just, what are your thoughts around removing all identifiers from the hiring process, names, location, education, from resumes? Again, with the intention of removing hiring bias, is this effective? And before, I want to get all of your thoughts on this, but I do want to just add this. First of all, I do think you could still measure, measure diversity even with blind hiring. It's really just, is blind hiring effective is what we're trying to get at, and you learn that through measurements. But that question reminds me, and this was a recent controversy. I remember I read the article in the New York Times, and it had to do with orchestras. Maybe some of you are familiar with this, right? Orchestras used to be like completely male, pretty much, right? They implemented blind auditions, right? Mm-hmm. And sure enough, the number of females is basically 50-50-ish, because of that. Great, blind hiring worked. Lately, though, there's been a push to remove blind hiring, because what's been happening is that orchestras are still lacking color, right? Black performers, et cetera. Exactly. And so there's controversy there because, shouldn't we be just looking at talent? And then the other controversy is, but what if this causes a slide back to a greater gender imbalance? So now that I've gotten, off of my soapbox, Kim, why don't you go ahead and then we'll go around, with Henry and Joanne.
All right. So I am so excited about this topic because I'm in the middle of implementing this at the University of California, Irvine. So I am part of any executive search, and we create these elaborate committees from all across campus or the Med Center to be part of executive searches. And every single person who's on the committee has to complete a managing implicit bias course that's in our LMS system before they can actually be part of the interview panel. And because I'm in an academic environment, we've had people who sometimes very literally take the class and think, oh, here's what we need to do. And so my first search, the question was, oh, here's what we learned in implicit bias. We need to make all of the resumes blind. And so our chief HR, our vice chancellor for HR asked me, okay, Kim, what do we do? And I said, absolutely not. And let me tell you why. Because I'm here to really be a talent management advocate. I can't fix what I don't know about. So I want people to be knowledgeable about how implicit bias impacts what we do. But until I hear people vocalize it, I can't fix it for them. And I also can't fix it for the other panel members who might also be dealing with it. I would much prefer to make sure people understand the concepts. And when we are in debriefs, everybody speak candidly, and I will interject when I need to do what we call challenge assumptions. If you've made an assumption about a candidate based on a bias, we are a public university. We have a candidate coming from a private university. And if in your assessment you've said, well, they're coming from a private university, I'm not sure if they'll be a good fit. What about that person's DNA changed because they worked for some period of time in a private university? What I'm now asking people to do is tell me in an objective way why you believe that person's skill set makes them more or less qualified to perform this work and help contribute to this environment. And after probably the third search of us being that very raw and candid with each other, and people recognizing that I was stepping in not to scold people, but under this exercise of challenge assumptions, we are much further along in our process around, I'm going to give you the whole story about this person, their name, their address, where they went to elementary school, whatever is in their profile. And if you are looking to make a decision about this candidate and it's anchored to some characteristic, you have to be prepared to validate that in an objective way, because if what you're sharing with me is related to a conscious or unconscious bias, we remove that and we're going to ask you again, tell me again why or why not this person. So we've made much more traction in everything being visible and being able to correct it real time than just trusting that by removing it, it doesn't pop up later when they ultimately find out more about this person.
Gary, what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I love the word challenge in this, and I think that's the opportunity for TA to really dig in there. I've got a really bad story on this. And just real quick, I had a candidate once for a nurse leadership position. BS degree. She fit all the criteria. Master's degree. Last name was Green, and her master's was from HBCU. So everything about her screamed, without even seeing her, that this lady is African American. I could not even get her a phone interview, despite her education and her progressive leadership experience. Her history is always 4 years, 5 years, 6 years at different organizations. I did not push back on that. That story haunts me to this day. So I am definitely always willing to challenge and push back. A manager will not at least give a overly qualified candidate a phone interview. So that is why I'm definitely on board with Kim as far as the blind resumes. I think that's crucial, especially for leadership positions. We're trying to move a diverse person for an interview. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree.
What about you, Joelle? Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think it brings a layer of it makes an average recruiter a great diversity recruiter, right? Because what they're focused on now is the skill sets, right? And whether or not the schools that they went to or what have you are playing, or the names of the person are playing into it, those get eliminated. One thing that I think would be difficult to eliminate, maybe in certain industries, is in certain levels, is probably their location. Especially now with a lot of companies moving to more remote work, it's a situation of does the company have a tax set up in that specific country or state, or those sort of things, in order to even hire that person. So then, imagine you find the best diverse talent ever, but then they live in a state where your company doesn't do business. I think that's the one thing that maybe might be a little bit more difficult. But I mean, absolutely, 100%. We use several different tools that where we leverage that type of information, where you can just go completely blind mode and go from there.
I don't want to belabor this point, so I want to just go around. One word answer. Don't cheat. Don't ruin this. Each of you. I know nobody, I'm assuming there might not be any attendees from an orchestra, but with the orchestra example, blind hiring in orchestras, yes or no? Joelle?
Yeah.
Kim?
Yes.
Gary?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We've solved that controversy. One of the topics that came up was around benchmarking. And how can you best benchmark your own diversity hiring metrics? Certainly, if you keep consistent metrics, you can do this internally over time. But I'm wondering, because we've dove into this topic at a recent, the last ERE Digital conference. By the way, everyone, next ERE Digital event, September 23rd to the 24th. ERErecruitingconference.com. I hope you attend there. That plug was not planned, but by the way, Gary and Kim will both be panelists at that conference as well. So just want to throw that in there. But oh my gosh, what was my question already? Where was I going with this? I blanked out. Benchmarking. How effective can external benchmarking be? Is this something that companies should be looking at, or should they really just focus more internally? Gary, what do you think?
I'm a recruiter, so I see both sides. I was going to say about internal. One, there are some great things you can do internally. One, you can have a chance to kind of track your internal promotion rate, which I think is a great metric that we can incorporate into diversity hiring, because once we have them in the door, and like Joelle was saying earlier, what does it look like once they get there? What are we doing for them once they get there? External, I think data, like Kim was saying, tells a story. So it's all useful to me. It's how you apply it and analyze it, in a common sense, purposeful way.
Yeah. Joelle, what do you think? External benchmark.
Can you repeat the question? Because I got stuck on Gary complimenting me, and I was just, I think are you kidding?
I love my manager. I love recruiting managers.
Yeah, I was asking about the value or relative value about when it comes to external benchmarking.
Yeah. So, that's tough, because I think that's an age-old thing, right? Like, it's when I was growing up, I'd have a friend who was able to stay up late or something like that, and I'd pitch it to my mom. Hey, Mom, Keaton gets to stay up late, and she said, "You're not Keaton. You can only improve yourself," right? Kind of a thing. And so I gear more towards let's improve ourselves, but also the other thing, let's say both, I guess, right? Let's keep an eye on what's external to make sure that we are actually improving the right things too. Yeah, I think that's really where it comes down to for me.
Yeah, Kim, any insights on benchmarking?
Yeah, so I think it's a healthy practice. You have to know if you're comparing apples to apples, because not everybody's strategy or process or resources are the same. Also from industry, it might impact it a little bit. And so, like I said, we see lots of companies share their diversity metrics around their workforce. They don't often share publicly the details of their recruitment process. But I would say be your own solution. So here, University of California, Irvine is in Orange County. I'm part of a TA leadership forum of other talent acquisition leaders. There's about 50 companies in our group. We meet quarterly, but we all talk to each other during the week on a regular basis. And so we've agreed to share and benchmark in our group, so we have a place to be able to work from, and it helps us be better individually, but ultimately it impacts the quality of employment opportunities in Orange County. And so I think if you feel like you don't have visibility out into markets, partner with some peers where you guys create some trust and confidence with each other that you're willing to share, so that you do have that data set, and you kind of figure out not just am I better than everybody else, but how am I doing relative to just being in the market and being a good employer and being viewed as an employer of choice, either in your local market or in your particular industry.
Yeah, good. So we're coming up at time. So before we close out, I really would just like to go around the room here and ask each of you, what is the the single most important piece of advice that you can give recruiters in terms of actions, simple actions that they can take tomorrow at work that will still have significant impact, right? Simple action, big impact when it comes to diversity hiring, maybe diversity hiring metrics and measuring. Kim, let's stick with you, and then we'll go around the rest of the room.
Yeah. So 2 things: be genuinely committed. Don't be in the space doing this work just because it's popular or safe right now. And in that, create a solid, well constructed process that allows you to create the framework that you need to really work towards your result.
Yep. Joelle, how about you?
I was just going to say, well, I wasn't going to say the exact same thing, but I was going to say double plus to that, because I think candidates will smell that, whether or not it's genuine or not, you know. Anyway, that's beside the point. But, you know, I think for me, I think it's just continuing with what I said earlier, is just making sure the effort's there from beginning to the end, right? And you know, we personally at Twilio use specific products, including Gem, actually, to make sure that we are trending in the right directions compared to you know, where we're going. And so what, you know, for me, it's about doing the research and making sure that you're performing towards what the data is showing you, and to, you know, make sure you're writing the story and not just letting the data write the story for you.
Yeah. Gary Olive, you get the last word on this.
Yeah, I would say, you know, like Joel saying, Kim was saying, be true to yourself. If you, as a recruiter, make sure that you are submitting it. Look at your own slate. Am I just submitting the same type of candidate over and over again? What does my candidate slate look like that I'm submitting? You can track yourself on Excel, Google Sheets, whatever it is, you know, and be the best version of yourself.
Yep. What great advice. And I actually like your advice about, hey, you know, technology is great. Our friends at Gem are great. You know, there's lots of great tech vendors out there, but, you know, you can use tools that you already have too to complement those, you know, like an Excel sheet. Technology, like I've always said, is never a solution. It will only enable solutions. So look, I gave myself the last word. But really, in all seriousness, Gary, Kim, Joelle, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate all of your perspectives.
Of course.
Thank you. Awesome discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I could keep talking about this like forever. I love this stuff. And thank you again, of course, to our friends at Gem for sponsoring today's webinar. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you for being here. And as a quick reminder, we'll get a link to the recording sent to everyone by end of day tomorrow. And of course, you can always head over to ere.net, which we update daily with articles featuring recruiting intelligence to help you elevate your thinking and your work. And again, I want to point out that your post-event email will include a discount code to register for ERE Digital, the premier practitioner-led recruiting conference, happening virtually September 23rd to the 24th. I'd love to see you there. We've got an amazing agenda, still growing, with speakers from Uber, Best Buy, Nike, Boeing. Then, like I always say, I can name drop more companies, but more important are the speakers themselves. Like I mentioned, 2 of them being Kim and Gary. And, you know, ultimately, our presenters all share the same struggles you're facing. So I hope you'll join the event to learn more on how to tackle your own challenges. So just head over to ererecruitingconference.com to learn more and to register. And with that said, all right, everyone, thanks again for joining today. Until next time, bye, everybody.
Bye.